Hello, and welcome to People of the Pod, brought to you by American Jewish Committee. Each week, we take you beyond the headlines to help you understand what they all mean for America, Israel, and the Jewish people. I'm your host, Manya Brashear-Pashman. American Jewish Committee and Jews around the world have been left completely shaken by the devastating events in Washington, D.C., where two members of the Israeli diplomatic community and AJC's community, Sarah Milgrim and Yaron Lischinsky, were brutally murdered after leaving an AJC reception. Last week, AJC CEO Ted Deutsch returned from Sarah's funeral in Kansas City to share what he's learned about Sarah and Yaron. He also shared how graciously people have reached out to express their support, including families of Israeli hostages. This week, to remember Sarah and Yaron, we invited two AJC colleagues who knew them personally to help us remember. Dana Levinson Walker is the director of AJC Access, the program for young Jewish professionals. In that role, she traveled to Morocco with Sarah and 24 other young bridge builders as part of the Michael Sachs Fellowship for Emerging Leaders, organized by AJC and the Mamuna Association. Dana is with us now to share her memories. Dana, thank you so much for being here. Can you please tell us about that trip last fall?
I had the privilege of traveling with Sarah and 25 other young professionals and staff from the U.S., Israel, Morocco, and France. And it was an extraordinary 7 days. We traveled to 6 different cities in 7 days. Normally, we back-end an Israel trip as a part of this delegation, but due to some geopolitical issues happening in the region, we made a decision to just go to Morocco at that time, and then we were going to go to Israel later. And we are indeed scheduled to go to Israel in September of 2025. It was an extraordinary experience for all different kinds of reasons. I think that the environment that we were walking into in Morocco was not only an embracing one, but it was also a challenging one. The day that we arrived in Morocco was the day we found out that the 6 hostages had been murdered in Gaza. And it was an incredibly painful moment for the Jewish participants, many of whom had a connection to the hostages or their families. And especially for someone like Sarah, who worked at the embassy, it felt really personal because she had been advocating, of course, for their release, but also had just been a voice for many of them. And it was deeply devastating. But the trip could have taken a really depressing and sad turn. And in reality, it actually took an incredible turn, where I've often told people that it wasn't necessarily the trip we planned for, but it was the trip we needed, in that it really fostered and created a family that is bound together now for life. They wept together, they laughed together. And I think what was so powerful is that it was Sarah's first time in Morocco, and she really just had this look of awe most of the time we were there. It was a look of deep reflection, a look of kind of taking it all in. We have really amazing photos of her where she's just kind of looking very ethereal and looking up in awe, walking around the kind of old city of Marrakesh and things like that. And she was an incredible addition to our trip. She was a calming figure, a grounding figure. She spent a lot of late nights with the folks just talking on the bus, talking by the pool. I know that on the last night of our trip in Marrakesh, she and a couple of other participants, Israelis and Moroccans and Americans, were up until 5:30 in the morning just talking about life and their ambitions and their goals and just understanding one another by the pool for hours and hours and hours. And Sarah was one of the people in that conversation.
Can you share what perspectives she added to the conversations? What did she contribute? And also, if you know anything about those ambitions and life goals that she shared with others.
Sarah was really passionate about the environment. She was really passionate about sustainability. she loved her dog. She was really passionate about animals and specifically dogs. I remember one of the things that we were talking about when she was preparing to go on the trip, and we had to kind of navigate when we were going and if we were still going because of the geopolitics of the region. And she was really concerned about boarding her dog. It's just so clear that she cares so much about everyone in her life. And especially in this case, her dog, who was a really focal part of her heart. She studied agriculture and sustainability, primarily sustainability. She was really interested in leaving the world a better place than she found it. And when we were going through the acceptance process for the Sachs Fellowship, we had a ton of applicants. And I think really what drew us to Sarah's application was that she was someone who was literally about to start her job at the embassy. We decided to put her in the agriculture and sustainability track because that's what she cared about. She was really passionate about finding sustainable solutions, especially in the region, because the region is growing hotter with each kind of succeeding year. Food and water security is becoming a challenge. Although, after she started her role at the embassy, she really was doing a little bit of everything. But one of the key features that she worked on was working with survivors who had experienced gender and sexual based violence after October 7th. And we couldn't really fathom anyone being more suited to do that work because of her gentle and calm and compassionate, assuring disposition. So she was ambitious in that she had a lot of big dreams for the future about what she wanted to do. And she was really figuring out what was going to come next for her. The diplomat's life is never easy, especially in these incredibly uncertain and overwhelming times after October 7th. And she and Yaron were planning a future, and they were really figuring out what was coming next for them.
Was that trip to Morocco the only time you spent with Sarah?
I met her in person for the first time at last year's AJC Young Diplomats reception, where we focused on talking about regional integration, which was something she was really passionate about. She was with her other embassy friends and colleagues. And it was great to meet her because I knew I was going to be traveling with her in the fall. So it was great to meet her in person. And then I saw her a few more times in DC over the course of our year, getting to know her. And then the last time I saw her was at the AJC Global Forum in April of just this year.
The Sachs Fellowship is named in memory of Michael Sachs. He was someone who dedicated his life to promoting Arab-Israeli engagement. We've heard a lot of people talk about Sarah's commitment to that as well. But how could you tell? Is there a moment in your mind that stands out, illustrates her belief that interfaith, intercultural engagement could and should happen?
I believe in Essaouira. I believe that's where we were. And they had given us the option that we could either go around the souk and do a little bit of shopping, or we could go to a mosque and participate in an opportunity with this incredible singer and spiritual leader. And there were a few of us who said, okay, we're going to go. And Sarah was one of them. And she came with me and with the others. And it was so extraordinary. Not only the experience of being in the mosque and hearing this unbelievable singing and just being kind of enveloped in this like spiritual warmth, which was just so wonderful. But she could have gone shopping, and she chose to go to the mosque, and she chose to put herself out there and experience something that she would likely not get to experience again in this kind of environment. She really took advantage of it. She was really eager to learn. In order to be a peace builder, in order to be someone who can really transform hearts and minds, you have to understand the people that you're working with. And she really took advantage of that in the best way possible. I have some really great photos and videos of us in the mosque. And of course, they have this amazing tea ceremony. So the spiritual leader of the mosque had this really, really, really cute child who must have been maybe 4 or something. And, hospitality is one of the pillars of Moroccan society. And everybody always does kind of like the double cheek kiss. And the spiritual leader wanted to make sure that his child went around and gave everybody these like little kisses. And I remember Sarah and I were like, oh my God, this kid is so cute and so well behaved. Like, I can't believe it. So he came over and gave us these little, like, these little bisous or, whatever, the cheek kisses. And we were just melting. He was so adorable.
It sounds like you were met with so much warmth and kindness in Morocco. As you said, it was the trip you needed. And it sounds like she didn't hesitate to immerse herself, to really engage with that kind of cross-cultural experience. Do you know of any examples of when she engaged with a not-so-friendly crowd?
One of the things that Sarah talked a lot about on the trip, and I know that my Access leader and friend Laura mentioned this at the vigil yesterday, is that, after Sarah started working for the embassy, a lot of her friends from graduate school and other places were really unkind to her and were really, really awful to her about her decision to work for the Israeli embassy. And in many cases, they stopped talking to her, they blocked her, they cropped her out of photos, they excluded her. And that was the kind of hostility she was facing. So I think what's really telling is that the people who love her and embrace her so much include Moroccan Muslims who saw her for the kind of person that she was, which was this extraordinarily warm and caring and kind and compassionate person, but also someone who had a vision for securing a better future for everyone in the region, regardless of whether they were Jewish or Muslim, regardless of whether they were Israeli or Palestinian or Moroccan.
Did she ever talk about how she handled those broken friendships?
I think they were just really painful for her. I think they were really hard. I think she found a lot of comfort in hearing from the other Americans on the trip who had also lost friendships and relationships after October 7th. It was like a very common refrain from a lot of the participants that some of their coworkers or long friendships, relationships, even with family, had been fractured or damaged or were kind of beyond a place of repair. And I think in many ways, not misery loves company, but, she was surrounded by others who understood her experience and vice versa, that they all could appreciate because they had all been through it in some way or another. So her experience was a familiar one, unfortunately, and a familiar one for many American Jews. So I think she took comfort in knowing that other people on the trip were experiencing similar things.
So Dana, how are you finding any glimmers of hope going forward after that evening?
In my almost 7 years of working at AJC, which is a long time, I think, at this point, have discovered that the key to keep doing what we do is looking at our work through a glass half full lens, because if we don't, it's just exhausting and debilitating. And I think what gives me hope is knowing that even in her last sort of moments, that she was fulfilling her desire to be a glass half full person. She had vision for how to support a sustainable region, how to deeply invest in her relationships with her colleagues and friends across many nations and many backgrounds. And I urge others to try and embody that sense of optimism and glass half full approach, because the person who perpetrated this brutal act sought to destroy the work. And the only way forward is to amplify it and double down on it. So that's the hope that I get out of this experience, is just knowing that we owe it to Sarah and to Yaron to keep amplifying their vision for what was possible.
Sadly, Sarah is not the first Sachs Fellow that the current cohort lost this past year. At AJC Global Forum in New York in April, AJC honored Laziza Dalil, a co-founder of Mamouna Association. She was a Moroccan Muslim who dedicated her life to repairing Arab-Israeli relations. and she was posthumously given the Ophir Lipstein Bridge Builder Award at Global Forum. Dana, how are you and the Sachs Fellows doing through what I can only imagine has been a difficult time?
It just all seems so unfair, deeply unfair, and deeply painful that two of the best and brightest were taken from us, were stolen from us, really. And it's something that we are grappling with. We're still processing, we're still dealing with it. I think what has been tremendously helpful is that we are grieving as a family. We are grieving as a group of not Moroccans or Israelis or Americans or French people, but as a collection of people who, by fate and circumstance, are now bound to each other forever by both the trauma and the joys of what we've experienced as a community in service of trying to make the world a better place. And it's hard, but we are going to keep going because of it.
If only that shared sense of grief was as powerful in the region. Dana, thank you so much.
Thank you, Manya.
As AJC's Director for Middle East and North Africa Initiatives, Benjamin Rogers handles the Middle East portfolio for American Jewish Committee, the same portfolio that Yaron Lischinsky handled for the Israeli Embassy. Benjy and Yaron spoke quite often about the importance of Israel's relationship with its neighbors. Benjy is with us now to recall his last conversation with Yaron, moments before his death. Thank you for joining us, Benjy. You were at the event in Washington that night. Where were you when the shots were fired just after 9 p.m.?
I left the museum around 8:55, and I was in a taxi heading home when I got a text message letting me know that there's been shots fired. Talked to a lot of people from the Israeli embassy, from AJC, trying to get a sense of what was happening. I remember calling Yaron, asking if he was okay, texting him if he was okay. And then everything kind of unfolded once I got home. A lot of confusion initially, and then kind of everyone's worst fears were soon realized.
You knew Yaron through the particular work you both did, correct?
I have the privilege of working on the Middle East file for AJC. And Yaron also had the privilege of working on the Middle East file for the Embassy of Israel. And the Embassy of Israel is quite large, but believe it or not, there's only two people that really focus on the Middle East, Yaron and then his supervisor, Noah Guinnessar. So Yaron was someone who I used to see frequently in Washington. He would always be at various events. It was always fun to have Yaron, an Israeli representative, at different programming with Arab diplomats, Arab representatives, something that was, clearly important to us at AJC, but also deeply personal to Yaron. Israel at the time of the Abraham Accords, Israel post-October 7th, Israel at a time of difficulty. How could we work together on a shared mission of advancing regional integration? And this was something that, Yaron was not the loudest person in the room ever. In that sense, he was not your typical Washingtonian, but he always had this presence. He always had this smile on his face. So whenever he was there, you felt this comfort. People have been saying a lot who have been meeting his family that he comes from a very noble family. And I think that perfectly describes Yaron. He was a noble guy. He was always somebody who was happy to be where he was. You could tell the work meant a lot to him, who I always enjoyed being able to see. That night, I got to spend a good amount of time with him. I'd seen him a few weeks prior, but we didn't really have the time to catch up. And it was just a great opportunity to be able to talk with him. He was very excited to go home. He hadn't been home in close to a year. He was going to see his family. He was going to go over Shavuot. Again, with that typical Yaron smile, calm energy, noble engagement. He was really happy that night. And that's something, the more I talk about this, the more that's important for me to share. Just because I am a new father, I can only imagine what his parents are going through. But he was happy that night. He was at a really good place. And I hope that brings some solace and meaning to all who knew and loved him.
I know people did more than mingle at this reception, and much has been said about the cruel irony that this was a program about humanitarian aid to Gaza. Could you speak a little bit more about that?
The event on Wednesday night was one that I moderated and one that I was actually quite nervous to moderate. It was on humanitarian diplomacy. This is not an easy topic to discuss right now. There's a lot of complexity, a lot of hardship, a lot of heartbreak. But the fact that he was there for this conversation showed his willingness to engage, his willingness to hear a conversation. It was not a political discussion. It was a discussion with representatives from IsraAid and representatives from Multi-Faith Network that was really working on showcasing how interfaith engagement, how IsraAid came together to say, how do we do something good? How do we do something good at a time when there's not so much humanity right now? And it was about trust. It was about doing better. It was about looking forward. And that, I think, encapsulates not only your own spirit, but very much Sarah's as well, who I knew less well, but was very much part of the AJC family, very much also deeply believed in being a bridge, bringing people together.
Is there a conversation or a moment, an encounter that really stands out for you as your key memory, core memory, if you will, of Yaron?
We always used to joke about diplomats that we had engaged together. There's a lot of sensitivities in this, but we would always seem to be at events where it was a great networking opportunity and great opportunities to expand understanding throughout the Middle East. And we would always kind of laugh and talk about how happy we were to be able to do some of those small engagements, small steps together. That and his smile. This was always somebody who walked into a room, and again, not the loudest person, but someone who you could just tell was good-natured, had a good heart. And that's essential in this work. There are a lot of good people in this field. Not everybody, though, is to the level of Yaron and to the level of Sarah. And I think I've been going through many different emotions. Most of it is just this feeling of surrealness. This is somebody who I just saw and is now gone. I still haven't fully processed that. But what I'm coming to more and more is that we've got to do better. We're better than this. We're all better than this. Yaron and Sarah were better. We need to find a way to live up to their ideals, professing kind of what he stood for. How do we get out of this period? How do we find a more understanding, a more hopeful, more empathetic world where we pull away from this black and white, good and bad, explain this to me in a tweet or a 5-second clip? This is complex. We've seen just how tragic this environment can be, how tragic and costly words can be. And I hope that for everyone, it is a rallying call to be better.
Thank you so much, Benjy.
Thanks, Manya.
In addition to this tribute to Sarah and Yaron, listen to my conversation with AJC CEO Ted Deutsch about the show of support after the May 21st tragedy and the incitement that led up to the anti-Semitic murders. This episode is brought to you by AJC. Our producer is Atara Lakritz. Our sound engineer is TK Broderick. You can follow People of the Pod on Apple Podcasts or Spotify and learn more at ajc.org/peopleofthepod. The views and opinions of our guests don't necessarily reflect the positions of AJC. You can reach us at peopleofthepod@ajc.org. And if you appreciated this episode, please share it with friends and family and write a review on Apple Podcasts.